Okay, I'm not one of these people that can talk and talk. Actually, I am the mouth of the South. This is Mary Conley in Jacksonville, but I've never really done a video that's like an hour, half an hour. I think that's my limit. So I'm going to go back in June of 19 when I went up to Jeb Stuart Junior High School, and I believe it is still called Jeb Stuart Junior High School. It was a school that my friend Debbie and I went to for junior high school, which was middle school, which was grades 7, 8, and 9. Uh, in 1967, I met Mr. Rigetko, which is his last name was OK Tiger, and he went over ICBMs and the attack on Pearl Harbor. When he was physically there, and the guys would have to swim up because they could only hold their breath in the water so long, and they would swim up, and the diesel fuel was on fire at the surface of the water from all the ships that had been attacked. The fuel was on fire. So a lot of men could not get out of the portholes and died. Um, so that was the element of and we were always visiting the school in summertime for some reason. Now, the school had previously been the high school. Okay, so the summer of 67, we're going to be entering the 8th grade that fall. Debbie had taken in her mind, we had been in the choir at Cedar Hills Baptist Church for a while. We had taken baton twirling up at the Westside Athletic Center, and now we're going to take summer band. Debbie had obtained, her mother was an organist in nightclubs, several nightclubs, the Heart of Jacksonville being one. She was bipolar, they called it manic depressant. She had had electric shock therapy. She was divorced from her husband, who was a commanding officer in the Navy. They were divorced. And anyway, Debbie and I were going to go to summer band, and we would walk up there. So let me go over the ride real quick because that's the beginning. We had summer band, and I guess it got out around noon because it probably was only about 2.5 hours, maybe 3. And it must have been the first week, which from everything that I figured was in like June 5th or somewhere in around then that date. Maybe it was Wednesday or something, and maybe it would have been the 7th. But whatever it was, maybe let's say it was a Wednesday, the beginning of summer band is going to last for 6 weeks. So I take my clarinet, which my mother had picked up at a pawn shop. It was a Bundy clarinet. It was a black case, kind of worn. I had never even opened the case that much. And inside was a purple velvet case that contained the bell shape and the 4 or 5 pieces of tube, black tube with the things. And I had to have reeds. You had to have a reed to play it. Debbie had a flute. It was a longer case. It was also black. And we walked up there, and after the practice, she stopped at the baseball field and sat on the bleachers and, was lollygagging, and I wanted to go home, and I don't remember why, but it was summertime. I wanted to go home. And, it's a mile walk, maybe right around a mile and a quarter. So she wasn't going. I said, okay. She was acting like a diva, like she had seen a movie, some flamboyant thing where she was doing her hands like, Carol Lombard or Barbara Streisand or something like, I'm the star. And I said, well, whatever she was talking about. Or I said, well, maybe she doesn't like going with me. I don't know, because I'm wearing my brother's Gant shirt and jean, cut off polyester jean. There's the cut off polyester jeans. Okay. So I said, I'll pretend to hitchhike. Now I said, I'm going to pretend to hitchhike. So I went across the little street, which was curved by a baseball field. And I stuck my thumb out awkwardly, and several cars went by because the school was cutting down. I guess around 12 or 1, they just shut the school down. And there was a body shop there, so some high school guys could be there because they had something called shop. So if they had like a hot rod, they could go back there and have their car worked on, even though they were no longer junior high school. They also might have been there because there was a basketball court in the back, and there also was a basketball backboard by one of the pine trees in the front parking lot, which is where we were in the front parking lot area. The band shell was in the back near the gym. It was like a coat room, really, but that was where we were taking summer band. It was going to be 6 weeks, I know that. The teacher's name was Joyce Russell or something like that. Joy Russell or something, black haired, about 24. And so we're walking. She gets on the bleacher. She's not going. I said, I'm going to hitchhike. I'll pretend to hitchhike because it was a summer of love. Are you going to San Francisco? Be sure to wear a flower in your hair. That was a new song. It was, there was a war in Israel, I think. The war in Vietnam was beginning to escalate, and several muscle cars went by, light blue Comets and Ramblers, possibly, like a safari wagon, possibly. Just, what I call muscle cars or cars that guys would have back then, V8s. And then this large um, olive green fishtail car went by. At first, I thought maybe an Impala, but it was wider and the rounder, so it might have been some type of Mercury or something. It was a larger. But at first, I thought, well, Mrs. Mock has a car like that. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble. So I started to walk back across, and all of a sudden, put, 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 there was this red Volkswagen. And it jumped on the clay, and I thought, well, he must have saw Debbie first. I always assumed, she's prettier, maybe she's seen her first. And so I walked across to where they were, and she was already down talking to him. He was a slender guy, older than us. I thought, well, he wasn't wearing a shirt. So when the Volkswagen went by, I said, "Hey, naked," and he pulled over, and Debbie's got down and started talking to him. She was wearing a white peasant shirt, cut off Wranglers that had been frayed about 3 inches. You'd sit there, you fray the loops out, so it had fringe on the bottom. And I was wearing probably one of my brother's shirts and excuse me. Anyway, one of my brother's shirts and those polyester frayed jeans. So it happened, and she talked and talked and talked, and she said, "Get in." And I said, "No, let's just pretend, Debbie. We were just pretending." I think I said it 3 times, just pretending. And we were on the passenger side at this time, and there was like this little concave guitar pick looking, acorn looking white knob you could push forward, and the seat would lean forward, and you'd climb in the back. Well, I thought about it for a second or two, a little bit, and I said, "No, we're not supposed to do this. We don't know this guy." He looked like a young coach, maybe, or maybe an officer in the Navy. I didn't even give it a second thought why he was there. And he had a real sharp haircut. You could tell his hair had been cut recently. It was a bright red Volkswagen. The tag appeared to be white with black lettering to me, and it had a border. But, I was reading about dark green. Some dark green appears black, apparently. I was reading about children that may have some color blindness. I don't know what my problem was. It was a bright, sunny June day. There was red clay underneath it. There was a bright red Volkswagen, like a rental vehicle or a brand new vehicle, you know. So we get in, and she gets in, and I get in the back, and I said, "There's books back here." And he said, "Just move the books. Just move the books." And so one of the books was a black leather bound book, looked like a Bible. And I said, "Oh, he's got a Bible." And I opened it, and it was like Arabic writing on one side and English on the other. It was like, how a Bible is split in context? It was just like that, except I think there was English on one side and then some kind of hieroglyphics on the other side. And I said, "Oh, put this over." So I just moved the books. And there was another book that was laminate that had some kind of yellows and blues on it, maybe a fisherman or so, I don't remember. But it was larger, like a picture book. And so I put them aside, and there was a yellow polo shirt that, with the ridges, polo, a golf shirt. And there was an emblem on it, was sort of shaped like a badge looking thing. It wasn't the guy. I don't think it was the guy on the horseback with the plain polo. It was more like some kind of embroidery over one of the chest pockets, and I just folded and put it over. And then so we go around the baseball ground and go to Lamoille, and Lamoille turns left, and it's sort of trafficy because people are still leaving, but not as many, but people were still leaving. So he gets to Lamoille and West Gannett, then all of a sudden he pulled out a revolver. I don't know if he reached in that glove box and pulled it out. I don't know where it came from. It was quite a long revolver. And his hand was a slender hand, a hand that was surgical. He was young. If this was him, he would have been 20 years, 7 months old. 20 years, 7 or 8 months old, because he was born in November. So this would have been June of '67. So he would have been 20 years. And of course, everybody said, well, he was Paul Alto going to Stanford or whatever on his scholarship. Well, I'm sorry. Around the first week of June, he wasn't there. So anyway, I say, what is your name? And he said, Theodore. And I said, Theodore? Because as I said before, if somebody's name is Walter in our neighborhood, it was Walt. Gregory was Greg. Stanley was Stan. Um, you know, we even had short names even for Mayor and stuff. I mean, just Deb or whatever. Kathleen Calf, it was just crazy. We didn't, so I thought it was pretentious. I said, Theodore. I said, well, what's your last name? And he said, Bundy. And I had opened my case and was looking at it because I was just a little busybody. But I had that case open. And I said, your name is Bundy, like my clarinet, and your gun is silver, like Debbie's flute. Debbie's father is an admiral at NASA. So I said that because Mrs. Hogue was always going on. My husband's a CO1, CO2, and my father was a chief petty officer, and Mr. Davis was the chief petty officer, warrant style or something. My father was ADC, aircraft something. He'd even gone to New York to study jet planes after one of his assignments. America didn't have the jet planes. The Germans had jet planes. So he went to New York to study the jet planes. But anyway, it's a long story. I told you guys. So anyway, I said, Debbie's father's an admiral. You ought to meet Vicky and Jeannie, Debbie's sisters. They're so beautiful, and they're already out on their own. Well, Vicky wasn't out on her own. Vicky was 15 or 16, and Jeannie would have been 19 or 20 herself. Jeannie was very beautiful. She looked like a young Rita Moreno or a young Liz Taylor. That was another thing. Mrs. Hogue worked evenings. So you didn't go down around their homes in the evening because she was getting ready. She made up herself with war paint. When she would do her hair up, put on a leopard skin jacket and have her dark black hair and her eyeshadow and her eyebrows a certain way, she looked very much like Elizabeth Taylor. She was a doppelganger for Elizabeth Taylor at the time. If you look up some pictures of Elizabeth Taylor in her 50s with that white streak in her hair, all very beautiful. A lot of makeup, a lot of clothing in that house. She tried to raise German shepherds, and she went on and on about my husband's a CO1, a CO2. And then she said, do you follow my drift? And things of this nature. So anyway, that was Miss Ho. We never saw eye to eye. She probably thought I was an anomaly. I want to play hide and seek and, tag and kickball and tetherball and ride my bikes and play with our Barbies and say the kittens were lions and tigers and stuff. I had a Barbie. Everybody, one Christmas we all got Barbies anyway. So Debbie's Barbie had on a zebra-shaped bathing suit with a giant hat, straw hat, and mine was just a blonde Barbie with a red bathing suit on. But anyway, okay, I'm digressing again. I'm sorry about that. She tried to grow English ivy on the side of her house. It was sort of an English tutor because it was black with the white shutter. I'm sorry, white with black shutters. They had a light blue Mustang, or I think it was. They also had one of those white Valiants. Vicky drove the Valiant, and Jeannie, I think, the older sister, drove the Mustang. I can't say if it was pale blue or pink. I can't remember. I can't tell you if it was convertible. I don't think it was convertible, but yeah. So the father was in the picture for money, I guess. Okay, he was down in Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy, and Jean was here. Okay, so now we've done this thing wrong, and the guy has pulled a gun, and Debbie shuts her mouth. We're facing a field because there was a Towers Hardware field with cows pasture, and I'm talking, and I just kept talking. I don't know what I was saying, but I said, you ought to go to the high school if you're looking for girls. I'd never seen anybody do that. Was he a robber? What was wrong with him? So at a point, he put the gun down, and he patted the stereo with his left hand. Pat, 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 like that. And the gun had been in his right hand, though. And I don't know what he did with that gun. He was wearing khaki colored shorts. That was kind of unusual because who wears shorts? Nobody in 1967. Guys would wear ribbed t shirts and corduroy bell bottoms, dark, or Levi jeans. Nobody was wearing shorts. A lot of guys wore awkward shorts, like Mike and Gene. They'd go to Atlantic Mills and get a white bathing suit, and the white bathing suit became their shorts, okay? There wasn't even a lot of options for shorts. Get gym shorts. I mean, they were there, but it was very. You didn't see guys wearing shorts very much. This guy was. He was very GQ, suave, as you would say back then. You know, for the little he was wearing, and there was a big white steering wheel. It had knobs on the bottom, and it was like the steering wheels were larger then, and since then they did not have an automatic Volkswagen. It was a red Volkswagen. They were not automatic till '68. I guess you could get some Ford automatic. So it had a stick shift between their legs. I could see between, there was about 6 inches between us. And then at that corner, his face went darker. He was already tanned and he had a mole somewhere. And his face went very dark and his eyes were black. They were soulless eyes. There was nothing behind the eyes. And I noticed at that point his eyebrows seemed to go straight across like a Cro-Magnon. It just seemed to go straight across his forehead. And then I just started talking like a little rat. I just talk and talk, you know. Anyway, we got up to the Texaco station at Harlow, and Debbie started talking too, because our instinct was we need to bring him back. Just my mom up there. We need to bring him back from wherever he's gone. At the point where we turned, I smelled this very bad body odor, like you would smell with a homeless person, sort of a sweet, crappy stink odor. And but Debbie talked to him. She had talked to him in the schoolyard, and then she talked to him again at the Texaco station. And I kept pleading with her to lower that shift so the seat would go open out. So finally, she was moving her arms around, talking to him, and she had the door open on the passenger side, and she finally lowered that thing. And I mean, you have a feeling you want to kiss the ground. I thought about Gene, who was an older guy in his 30s that worked at the gas station on Harlow. And Gene worked for John Payton, the mayor, at the gate station on San Juan for years until he was about 84 years old. And about 3 years ago, I guess he had a stroke or some health issue, and he may be gone now. But I remember Gene, because one time he opened a Fresca, and I didn't want the Coke open, so I switched it out for an unopened one. And then he mentioned it the next day. He said, somebody put an open Fresca back in my thing or whatever. So I was in trouble. But anyway, so around June 6th, 7th, okay, my mom had given me a diary in 1966 from Woolworths or Grant's, a little, diary. It wasn't important. It wasn't my main gift, And I had a bookshelf with Nancy Drew, comic books, uh, ceramics. My dad had built me a little bookshelf in my room, so it was in there among all that other stuff. Tween magazines. We used to get the Tween magazines. That's why I knew about the hippie movement and everything, because we used to get these magazines with psychedelic covers and all this stuff, Davy Jones, whatever. So anyway, it was on that shelf, and Debbie goes, I went down to Kathleen's with a diary, and I'd written a page, and I'd moved it a few days ahead, and I wrote, I don't know what I wrote in there, but I wrote about the adventure with the weirdo, because he did let us out. And I wrote about the adventure and how frightening and how weird and everything it was, and we were coming of age. And Debbie says, no, you can't write in your diary. Your mom will read the diary and we'll get in big trouble. And I was down at Kathleen's and we were between the houses. And she says, you have to rip it out. We hitchhike and he displayed a gun. You have to rip it out. So being the docile person I was, I ripped it out and put it in the fence post. So Debbie, now my nose is going to act up. Oh, so I did that. So I've tried to read the imprint, and and she says, your mom will read the diary. Well, that was stupid, because my mom had given me that back in 6th grade, and we were already headed to 8th grade, and I very seldom wrote in it. So if she had monitored it, she might have wanted me to journalize so I could, improve my vocabulary, improve my writing skill. I don't know why they did that. I was reading Leon Uris, Ernest Hemingway, Das the Russian writers. I've read Anna Karenina, whatever, the one about the dog in Alaska and all that. I've read all those stories. I read a lot of them. I read Herman Walk, Melville. What's the guy's name? The Continent, whatever. I've read all those things. The War, Triple War, whatever. Uh, so I've read Ulysses even. Yes, I've read a lot of things in my time. Warsaw Ghetto. Let me think of some of the things I read in junior high school and high school. I can't even remember all of them. What was that guy's name that was left on the porch and became a famous writer? He wrote about things all the way back. The Continental. I've read Truman. I read a lot of stuff. I even got my book signed by the Colin Powell, My American Journey, and all these things. I used to read a lot. I used to read about Oppenheimer. I used to read about, uh, the 50s and the Rosenbergs, all this, the anti defamation committee or whatever. I listened to that stuff too. I used to listen to it when I was a baby. My father said, what is NBC? I said, National Broadcasting Company. He said, what is CBS? I said, Columbia Broadcasting System, or, whatever. And he's looking at me, I'm about 7 years old. He said, well, maybe this TV's a good thing. I don't know. Anyway, I digress again. So let me go on. So I went over there about a few days later, but this is the rub. My father took a week off in June and we went to Daytona. So you can see why I only learned to play Little Brown Jug or something on that clarinet. I didn't go very far. It's only 6 weeks and I missed a week because my father took a week, and this has finally come to me. So this is August of 67. There's my grandmom, Conley, and Opal, who was only about 5'2", so that makes me about, 4'9" or something. And that's me in 1967. And you see that little red surfer shirt? Got it in Daytona. See the little straw hat fedora? Got it in Daytona. Also, I was allowed to get something like this in Daytona. This is one of them, but I had gotten one that was like this. So we went on the boardwalk and Woolworths and different places. We would go to Rip Van Winkle in Daytona, spend a week. Well, obviously, Aunt Shirley and Jerry and possibly Aunt Bobby had come down. So my father took another week in August because back then he would have 2 weeks. Sometimes we'd go to Memphis, sometimes we'd go to Philadelphia. So he had 2 weeks. So he must have taken one in June, which abbreviated my studies in clarinet because right off the bat. So that was another thing. Debbie was acting crazy. She didn't want me having something in my diary. Well, to heck with her. I had friends on the other block, Mike and Jean, Janice and Stoney, who turned out to be kind of a hood, and then Billy, Karen, and Joey were in the Powers. So there were plenty of kids on the other block. Plus, I think I was getting ready to go to Daytona. So, if she had any assignations, any meeting, any dinner dates for her sister with this nice-looking guy who was weird, and he gaslighted her somehow, and he went over. So I was just trying to scare your friend or some crazy thing. I wouldn't have known about it. I wouldn't have known about it. I didn't go there in the evenings because that's the time Mrs. Hogue would get ready for work. And if we were going out of town, I just said, to heck with Debbie. I'm going back to my block. My mom might have been the Davises right then talking. But I had packing to do. We're going to Daytona. We get on the canvas rafts. My brother was 15. He could rent a motorcycle down there. Boogie boards. They had boogie boards, rubber rafts. You get on the waves on those rubber rafts. They had like a rope going around them. You'd play on that raft for like 50 cents an hour or something, So anyway, we're out of town. Let's say from Saturday morning until the following Sunday afternoon. So that's 9 days, right? You got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 days. And Theodore Bundy was on a time schedule. He was already due. So let's say it's around the 7th. He was due in his college for his scholarship. He had a summer course of Chinese in Sanford. So one thing that I didn't care about was when I walked away from Debbie that day is he had an out-of-state tag and he said he was college. So he had an out-of-state tag. He had knobbly little athletic knees. Um, he had a Leave It to Beaver type hair scoot or a F. His hair was very thick. Now, when he pointed that gun, I did look to the ceiling of the vehicle, and it was white with little peg holes. And the Volkswagen had an emblem on the steering wheel. Seemed like it stuck up some. And, it kind of reminded me of the Parkers, because they were Catholic. Everything was like a foreign thing. It was, the tag was white with black lettering. Anyway, so all that. So this was Theodore Bundy. He was here in Jacksonville. I don't know what the hell. I know there was a construction site offside of the campus called Confederate Point, where they were actually building a subdivision. This was the 60s, so they were still building subdivisions. They built a subdivision called Confederate Point. It had nothing to do with me. Although Janice's older brother, Craig, had a cave over there where he had been a thief. He had been stealing radios and small TVs and jewelry. He was a burglar, basically. And he had to go to the White House, the boys' reform school. What do they call it? Doherty, over in Marietta, way over Marietta. And one time we went to visit him there. But he had set the woods on fire. So I remember thinking when it came down, I said, well, hey, at least it cleared the acreage. They're building Confederate Point. So if he set the woods on fire, it actually helped a little bit, That's my way. I always try to find the better scene. So anyway, so he went to White House, I think they call it, because there was a little butcher building outside of it called White House. He was an okay guy. He eventually worked for at the Avenues Mall, and he worked for British Leyland. And he actually became quite wealthy, but I digress. That was a sad situation all around. Craig was a nice-looking guy, but he was the same age as Vicky and about the same age as my brother Johnny. But anyway, that's about all I knew about Confederate Point. I know there was construction going on there, and I've often wondered in these 4 years since I've been studying this if maybe Bundy was there at that construction site, because my friend Bonnie said they would pay under the table and you just take the palm fronds and throw them in the fire. Back then, they would have like a mound and they'd burn the debris sometimes. So they had to clear the acreage for the little subdivision called Confederate Point. Later on, in 78, they were still building stuff over there called the Preserves, called the Confederate Point Apartments, and I think there's 3 apartment buildings over there. The Hermitage. Is it the Hermitage? I don't know. There's 3 apartment buildings. So anyway, so on and on and on. Okay, so now I've graduated from high school and I'm working at JSO from May of 75 until November of 77. Again, you think, well, maybe you heard something. Never heard a word. Never knew anything about it. I remember guy saying, well, only thing left on some girl was a jawbone, but I thought he was talking about somebody that drowned at the beach, because obviously if you're in the ocean, stuff rips you, sharks and crabs and everything eat flesh off of people, and I thought he was talking about that. That's the only thing I can remember. Something I never remember anybody saying capture somebody Ted Bundy in 75. Again, I don't remember anything about it. It's not like Homicide came down and talked to a dispatcher about stuff that was coming national news, and so it was just okay. Never heard nothing. And furthermore, he said his name was Theodore. He said Theodore. So to me, Edward Kennedy was Ted. So Edward was Ted. Theodore, abbreviation, probably would have been Theo. Hey, Theo, But anyway, that's my mind. So time went on. I left in November of 77. And I was very upset. I had a crush on some guy that was inappropriate and stepping on his toes, and he worked for the state attorney. And I was still taking my criminal justice courses. I got an associate in arts, liberal arts with a major in criminal justice, associate in science, criminal justice, and a bachelor of arts in criminal justice. So in that time frame, I was still taking my courses, and I got a security job. And this is a note that I just looked at recently, that the weather on February 8th, 1978 was bitter cold. The night had dropped down to 26. There was like 7/10 of an inch of rain, and the daytime temperatures were only in the 40s. Now on the 9th, when Kimberly Leach went, it was a little better. It was like maybe 39.52 or if 39.49 or something. It was still half an inch of rain. But the previous day in February was one of the bitter, bitter cold days. And I think I was at Jack's Port Authority. And this is a wonderful thing because I believe he had come back to get me and Debbie. I swear to God I do, because it's a long story. Because when I was working at the Port Authority, I was watching something called Sapporo's. It was a collaboration between Dodge and Mitsubishi, as odd as that is. And they made Sapporo's. And it was innovative because when you would open the door, they would ding, 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 you know. So if the door was open, all those cars that I was watching had keys in them. And they were just in a field down under the expressway downtown, about 3 miles from Edison Avenue, where he stayed one night. Anyway, he stayed at the Holiday Inn on Edison. This would have been about 2 or 3 miles away. But anyway, he probably didn't know about the Port Authority. So I'm sitting in a field of cars with keys in them, okay? Just a woman and a scraggly old Doberman. Or sometimes we'd have Doberman, sometimes we didn't. I think they got Parvo during that period. But anyway, there was a guy, he looked like an aging Anthony Edwards. He was a supervisor. And so it must have been sometime in February. It was cold. I was taking my courses, and it was a night shift, and I was tired. And I thought, well, let me sit in my little Datsun and warm up. And I was so tired. And he came up, he's wearing a white shirt with a little badge and navy or black. We could wear navy or black slacks. We worked for Dale Carson Enforcement Security. And he came up and tapped on my window, and I screamed like a banshee. I screamed. I know it went all the way down to the feet, down to his, from his head to his feet, because I screamed that loud because he tapped on the window. And I was kind of shut-eye. I was starting to fade because I was so tired. And he had a straw state trooper type hat. He might have been in law enforcement, like a dispatcher or something here, but he was retired and he was doing this job. And we were guarding the cars till the truck drivers would pick them up and put them on the long haulers. And we had to check the VIN numbers and make sure the right cars are picked up that were going. A lot of those cars were painted black, and they had like a yellow and orange arrowhead on the hood. They were called Sapporos. Some of them were trucks, but these were just most of the vehicles, Sapporos. Sometimes kids would get in those lots and they'd pay whack-a-mole because they'd have keys and they didn't know how to drive, and they could mess up some cars backing them, doing around. So anyway, he said, it's about those girls. And, I don't know what it was about. I was just didn't want to be trapped in a car, but I screamed like a banshee, and he had tapped that window. And I remember that. So that might have been the February of 78. I was lucky in that my last name is Conley, Conely. Most people, when you say your name is Conley, what do they spell? Conley. They look in that phone book for CON, and I was always around the corner. I don't know if he ever knew where I was, but I know I had a lot of funny phone calls during that young period of my life in my 20s. I had a lot of strange phone calls when people would just drop the phone, hang up. You can go back. I guess you could go somehow on Riverside. I had a lot of odd phone calls. Anyway, nobody would talk and stuff. Mrs. Hogue sold their home on Aldington around 75. And the reason I knew that is I was working at JSO, and I would work in the booking office and enter the dockets. So I would go from dispatch, walk across the street to the booking office, and enter the dockets. They had a thing about prison overcrowding or jail overcrowding, and Judge Scott wanted to have a count of how many people were in the Duval County Jail at any given time. So I would go across the street and enter the dockets. And one night, Debbie's mom came in for DWI, driving while intoxicated. And since she was we never really got, she was like Patsy Ramsey. We just didn't get along that well, And here I am with my little white, I worked for the sheriff's office. I had a white shirt and navy blue slacks. And I said, I'll stay over because I know she would get what you call released on your own recognizance for DWI. My brother had a drinking problem too, so I knew. So I stayed over, and I was going to drive Mrs. Hogue home. Now, I know people within the sheriff's office said, what are you doing? I was just driving her home. She didn't have any other crime than DWI, and she was a mother from the neighborhood. That's respectful. Heck, even when Stoney Fagan got in trouble, and he was a drug dealer and had something about throwing, anyway, my father went out in the woods where he had been staying to get his glasses. Glasses cost money, and he's going to need them in jail. So my father went out in the woods to get Stoney's glasses to make sure he had glasses where he's headed, That's the way I was brought up, There was a mother from the neighborhood who's gotten herself in some kind of mess, and she was mad as a wet hen. But when I drove her home, I thought we were going to Aldington, 4110 Aldington, but instead we went to one of the apartment complexes over in Confederate Point. And I guess I realized then she sold the home. So by 78, that home had been sold and the girls were scattered to the wind. Now, I didn't know what went on the week after the meeting because we went out of town to Daytona. We're in Daytona. I got the shirt, the hat, and one of these little, I don't know what, I called them rat fink dolls, but I don't remember what trolls they called them. I don't remember what they called them. They were small. The one I got was probably like that. I'm tired. I've been painting the stockade fence for 11 days in 115-degree heat. And, you don't just paint it. I had 8 barrels, 8 trash cans of yard waste. And then the neighbor got mad because I pulled all these vines and shit off. I'm not going to go there. And that was the last thing I painted because I had to move the trellis. I had lattice up there, and I had to take the lattice down to paint front and back. And there were 4x8, 4x8, 3 of those, about 30 feet of it. Of course, the fence is like 32, so I had to put a little gap between them. And I'm still exhausted from that adventure. Believe me, all I could think of while I was out there painting is Vietnam. You have to have the salt tablets. I was there with potato chips. It was that bad. I was drenched. I'm also on an antifungal for one of my toenails, so it says causes excessive sweating. So, and it was 115 out in that yard. Oh my God, it was hot. Anyway, I digress. Anyway. You repair the fence as you go along. If there's splatter of gray onto the greenhouse paint, you come back, and where I took the lattice down, I had a couple nails here and there, and I went and put caulking in the nails, and then I painted all along there a touched up green, with the house paint, and then after I painted on the front of the lattice that goes around the perimeter of the house, I have the lattice there too. And the steps in the front, the steps in the back, the mailbox area, all of it. I painted everything. And then some places I had lattice that couldn't be taken down. That's why I had to paint, like this, It was horrible. I still got some paint in my fingernails. You can't see it. But anyway, where was I? Okay, so the Hogues had sold their home and they were scattered. Now, I'm going to go into some of the things that I believe happened. I believe that Debbie and Vicky and Jeannie knew him beyond the ride. Debbie kept the ride a secret. He might have told her, look, I'm going to get in big trouble. You've got to tell your friend not to say anything about it. And I want to meet your sister just like she said and whatever. But the only reason I did that was to scare y'all. I don't want you to ever hitchhike again. Just take on like an authoritarian figure, and this is why it happened, and that's all that it was. Because he needed funds to get back across country. He had a nice car. I don't know how he rented it. I assume it was he rented it. I assume the way he patted the steering wheel, he showed deferential treatment to that car. And maybe I thought of him as like maybe he was a robber or something, maybe. And it was my friend. Her parents are in custody disputes. She's not allowed to get in trouble. She says not to talk about it. So I didn't. And I went off on another adventure. I went on another adventure to Daytona for 9 days, so I didn't know anything that was going on, nor did I know anything that went on for years and years. And I believe they formed a friendship with that family in 1967 to who knows when. But none of us knew he actually was a murderer. So now I've talked like 39 minutes. I don't even know what this little phone is going to do. So what was I going to say? After all of this, about a year later, Debbie comes up, and she's riding a pastel color bicycle. I don't know if it's pink. I don't know if it's green. And it had like one of those little imitation baskets on the front that was like made of plastic, but it looked like it was wicker. It might have actually been wicker. The household was kind of like Patsy Ramsey. Everybody's trying to wear a little crinoline and stuff, But anyway, she had that bike. And she came, and I think my dad had to put air in the tires. And she said, we're going up to the Riviera Apartments. I'm thinking, what the heck? It was miles away from the house, and you had to ride on Blanding. Nobody rode their bikes on Blanding. And so we went up there, and I had a Western Fire blue metallic from Western Auto, and I rode my Western Flyer, and Debbie rode this little, thing after the air was put in the tires. Call it a curly Q bike, and we rode up there, and we went to the very last apartment complex there's two, it's split in half, and we went up Blanding to Riviera, and we went upstairs, and there was a guy wearing like tan corduroys and a white turtleneck sweater, and there was what was it? What do you call it? Shag carpeting, unmade bed, and I walked towards the refrigerator I was going to get a glass of water, and he said, no, no. And so there was a kitchen with an island, like a little island, a surfboard shape, oval shape, white formica, uh, a desk-looking thing under it like that. But it had a white, a white formica top, oval shaped. Above it with a bicycle wheel with kitchen utensils hanging from, like spatulas, big forks, ladles, different things were hanging from it. And I said, like a mobile, a modus or something, whatever you call it, mobile. I'd never seen that before. And he didn't let us go to the refrigerator, and he kept going from corner to corner, kind of smiling. And Debbie had a 3-page typewritten thing to hand him. And I thought, oh, this is some kind of breakup. And I remember thinking, our bikes are downstairs. We need to go get anybody could take our bikes. They were not locked. This apartment complex, we need to go get our bikes. Someone was giving me the creeps. And so I didn't recognize him as being the same guy. But again, when you go from like 12 and a half to 14 and a quarter, that's a sea change. You're having your period now. This is how I would have looked then. So you see the angst. That's a typical shirt from that period too. Your date on that? I assume this is about a year and a half later. Anyway, this is how I was that summer. This is August of 67, and I missed that week. So there was a series of stupid things that happened that I never knew that Ted in the Northwest with the Theodore that we rode with until 78. Now, in 78, I remember seeing the newspaper, and I was at my parents' home because I'd left JSO. That was a ridiculous, humiliating thing. And finally, at 79, I got on at IRS, and I stayed there for 37 years, and I loved IRS. I still do things with IRS, even today, with volunteers and tax assistants. But anyway, my parents had the newspaper, and they must have printed that wanted poster, and there's one picture where he has short hair over to the bottom left, and I said, that's the guy. I mean, I recognized him. And I ran down to Kathleen's mom, Mrs. Davis. Of course, the Hogues were no longer there. But I ran down to Mrs. Davis because my car had been in a fender bender, was at Mako. But anyway, I ran down to Mrs. Davis's, and I had the Datsun, but it had a fender bender. But anyway, I ran to Mrs. Davis's, and I showed her that. I said, this is the guy, this is the asshole we rode with. She went, ooh, or something. And she just was like, well, it was like she knew other stuff, but she didn't tell me. And that's the way it's been ever since I've been researching this. Now, I'm going to go to Next Door Neighbor. This is something I've been researching. I put it on there and I told the story. And it's a community social network. And I did it a couple years ago. And I said, does anybody have any contact with Bundy in the 60s or 70s here in Jacksonville? And I got maybe 5 responses. One response said that one girl's brother's girlfriend, okay, the Rodriguez girl that wrote me, you can go to Next Door and find these things. And she said, my brother's girlfriend at the time was walking between Parvin and Hugh Edwards on Wilson, which intersects with Blanding, which intersects with Aldington. It's just a few blocks from Debbie's old home. She said she was walking between Parvin and Hugh Edwards when a white van tried to get her, and she said she knew it was Ted Bundy. It was during the 36 hours. And she just turned around the other way and ran back to where she lived. So it's hard to turn a van. And Wilson is a relatively busy road. not extremely, but it's relatively busy. It's like 4 lanes, so it's busier. And she turned around and ran back, so the van couldn't turn. Another person said at that time that one of her sisters or aunt or somebody was had to go all the way to Pensacola for some reason or something, and she had to go over this long extension bridge that was like over the marshes and waterways. And she said that whole time, even she would go slow, she would go fast. There was an orange Volkswagen that was behind her the whole time, and so wow. Then another person said he had a classmate that went to school in Lake City with Kimberly Leach, and he was a good boy. He made A's and B's, but after the little girl was killed, his whole life sort of changed around, and he ended up being a drug user and suicidal and just acted crazy. I don't know if that's related to the little girl dying at school. Maybe he had a crush on her. I don't know. He said the principal's life changed. And I said, I don't want, I didn't want trying to get sad stories. I just, want connections. Another person said they were a member of Evangel Temple on Ramona off of I-10, and that Bundy had gone there during the 36 hours and asked for money and food. And the preacher or the caretaker said, well, you could do some errands here and we'll give you a little bit of money. But he didn't want to do the errands or the work, but they may have given him some food, a couple bucks. I don't know. I don't know how he knew about that. They swear to God it was Ted Bundy that had gone to their church, Evangel Temple. And then another person said, my uncle used to go up to the roller derm at Cassett. Debbie and I used to always go to the roller derm. I swear to God, it was a thing from like 11 to 15. We were at the roller derm almost every Friday. Whenever we had a couple bucks and we weren't going to the movies, we'd go into the roller derm and skate around the roller derm. So this guy said he was there with the van and trying to approach young girls, and they pushed him away from there. So those were the incidents in my first next door neighbor. A couple years later, I put it in again and I said, does anybody have any? And some crazy woman, she said, and I told him, I said, I called Debbie Julia, like Julia London, Barbara Eden, and young Liz Taylor or Audrey Hepburn looking person. I called different names. So I said, I was with Julia, and she put apostrophes around Julia, and she said, "Oh, that woman's crazy as a loon." Blah blah blah. And I mean, she went ballistic. And somebody said, Mary should sue you for slander." And I said, "I don't want all this. I was just asking people." Basically, they shut me down. So I said, "Damn." Then about recently, I put it on one final time, and I said, "Does anybody have any contact with Bundy during those 36 hours he was here?" And I got several weird incidents. Now, this is the weirdest one of all. Over on Normandy, not far from Green Acres, not half a mile from Green Acres, there's a memorial park and a cemetery. It's called Riverside Memorial Park. And that's where my parents are. That's where the Davises are. That's where my brother is. And so it was there all that time, the cemetery. And where there now is a CVS and a Records, a CVS pharmacy's there in a fast food restaurant. This girl wrote, and her name was Barbara or Brenda Murray Smith. And she said she was hungry and it was dark. And she was hungry, so she went up to a little grocery store. There were other little groceries like C&S. I don't know, remember, not like a little Champ or something per se. It was like a small box grocery, not not an Albertsons, not a Food Line, just a small grocery. It might have been a Food Line, I don't know. But it was, she said it was probably a rundown like 1950s, but she went over there because she was going to get some food to eat and pick up some stuff, maybe bread and peanut butter. Who knows what she was going to buy? Maybe pasta and saucers. I don't know. But she went in there. She said the parking lot was dark. It was not well lit. And she said when she went out to her car, there was an old white van or a dirty white van. She said it was extremely dirty. And she said the back door was open, the back of the van. And in order for her to get to the driver's side, she would have had to walk by the open van door. And so she kicked it with her foot and shut it and got in her car and locked it as quick as she could. So I wrote her back and I said, well, can you tell me what kind of car you were driving? She said she was riding a white and red Oldsmobile. Well, I've looked up one of the hot models for the 70s, and there was an Oldsmobile Cougar. And this would have drawn Bundy's attention because you must remember Diane Edwards had a red Mustang 65, and then Carol DeRoche had a maroon Camaro, a 70s model. I think a 72 or 74 model, I don't remember. It might have been new. It might have been 73 or 74 Camaro. And I think it had a black vinyl top. I'm not sure. So a red and white Oldsmobile Cougar could have drawn his attention. Then finally, these are the stuff from the next door neighbor. There was one other one. I can't remember. You'll have to look at it. Oh, okay. Now, a few years ago, when I'm doing this research, I said, let me get Ann Rule's last edition. And she passed away. I called her way back. And she said, well, was it 68? Was it 68? I said, no, ma'am, it was 67. Anyway, it was 67. I know it was 67. You know, Jeannie became pregnant not long after. But anyway, so there's some terrible secret. And every time I get close, the doors are locked. But anyway, I was at the book mine getting that book because I could get a used edition at the book mine. Ron Chamberlain Book Mine, Roosevelt, and Roosevelt over there off near Roosevelt Square. Anyway, I went down, and there used to be a Consumer's Warehouse, I think, and it's a Chamberlain Book Mine, and I got the Ann Rules edition, and I'm checking out, and I had my debit card out, and there's a girl, and she kind of looked like Harry Potter or Tina Fey, and she had the dark hair and glasses, and she says, oh, my mom met him when she was a child. And I said, what? She said, yes. My mom lived at the Gator Lodge, and my grandparents owned the Gator Lodge on Phillips. I said, really? But there was a line behind us, and I couldn't ask her anything else, so I left. And I never went back and followed up on it. So I looked up the Gator Lodge, and the daughters were Linda and Lisa King, prominent in Jacksonville, and they will not respond. And Mark Woods, the writer for Times Union, had wrote a story about the Gator Lodge, because they had a gator on it and his clothes. It was one of these ma and pa. The father was Salvador Tomiscu, and he changed his name to Sam King. He was married to Susan King. She gave birth to Linda King in 61, and I guess Lisa King in pretty rapidly after 62 or 63. So I don't know whether she was Linda's daughter or Lisa's daughter, but she spontaneously said, my parents saw him. Well, I decided recently I'll go downtown and see when the motel was sold. So Sam King died in 72, and I think it's somewhere around then that Susan and the daughters moved down San Jose Manor, and then in 74 it was sold to Charles Knowles, Knowles, et al. And I said, well, there you go. So that was before 78. So if Bundy was in the Gator Lodge before 78, before 74 even, maybe it was 68. It was the Gator Lodge was like the Red Heart, the Heart of Jacksonville, in that the politicians would go there for eating steaks, and they had good steaks and good bakeries and everything. So they would go there, right wing, left wing, they would go there. Consolidators, non-consolidators, the mayor, everybody, they would go to that banquet hall and have lunch. That's what politicians do. So I said, well, dang, I can't find her. They're not responding. It's like everybody shuts the door. So whatever secret it is, it must be so terrible that they will not tell you anything. Debbie's down in Palm Coast. She won't say anything except don't obsess about something that happened 53 years ago. Don't obsess about something that happened 53 years ago. Well, I feel like we should obsess about it because I think I think this is the way it went. They think the family is very fragile and something happened between them and Bundy. And if it's brought up, they go ballistic, and they have bipolar in their family, and there may be a child. That's all well and good. But I feel, and they may have said, and we can't find any murders that are attributed to him in the times that there were visits. There was another thing that happened that it just came in my mind. Debbie, at some point after we graduated, or I think we graduated or were in high school. Maybe we're in high school, but we're not, maybe it was right after high school. and she might have been in the junior college. I don't remember, but her father had gave her a semester in Austria. Vicky, I think, went into nursing, and Debbie went into nursing, and I think they got to go to Austria for a semester. That was his, high school gift or something. And I'm thinking, if when they said skiing, when they first said skiing, I thought water skiing. And I said, I've never skied. I don't really care to. No, thank you. ACL injury out of meniscus. No, thank you. Broken neck, like Sharp Bono guy. No, thank you. I'm going to go. There's some things you don't want to do at 68. Maybe a little paddle board. I don't know. I think of the risk. Can I swim real good anymore? I don't know. But anyway, so I'm sitting there, and I'm a Blue Cross worker, a Blue Cross Blue Shield worker at that time, and I'm thinking, Kathleen was excited about it, but they had to learn to ski, snow ski, before they went, and they were, I think, going to go out to Colorado, which is, I said, well, there's a connection too, right there. Anyway, Philadelphia's only about a day's drive from here, so it's like 1,200 miles, so it's just a day's drive. And you can see from the killer of Rachel Morin, the guy traveled 3,000 miles. Young people do stuff. They can do something in 3-4 days. Give them a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, and a big jug of water, and they're gone. So I don't know how Bundy got stranded here or why he was in Florida. I don't know. I know it was him. I wrote his name down. And, a 37 years IRS, 2 honorable discharges, Fort Meade, Maryland. I had Spec 4, U.S. Army Reserves, Florida Army National Guard, 4 degrees. I said, this is ridiculous. I'm tired of Kevin Sullivan. And so, I'm sorry. No. Another thing is, this is the final thing, and I'm not good at talking this long. Another final, it's probably going to take all day for this phone, and it's probably the last thing this phone's going to do because I'm getting ready to trade it out to a different phone. But anyway, that has a better battery. So I'm going to plug it in, let it do this download. I was going to say, oh, shoot. I've done a lot of study work on this, Mr. Deckel. I'm not stupid. Oh, the whole Florida. Go to Lake Sammamish. The blonde girl, the black-haired girl. Okay, he kills him. He's forever after. Oh, another thing I found in research, that the Volkswagen didn't have automatic until 68. Another thing I found out is the keys, and I could not believe this. A key to a Volkswagen from 1950 through about the mid-70s had 13 models. 13 keys. I guess it was like the new Germany after Hitler died. They were going to be friendly and honest and persevere and inexpensive. I can see the inexpensive part because my mom was from, as a German, so, frugal every way. But anyway, Ford had 1,000 keys. General Motors made 8,000 keys. Volkswagen Corporation out of Germany had 13 keys. If you got your hands on about 6 keys, there's a good chance you could find a Volkswagen that opened up. So if you'll notice, in Aspen, he went into a Volkswagen camper. If you'll notice, in Florida, he also went into a Volkswagen camper to get a tag off of it, probably looking for keys. He also said that he had taken a black, souped-up, 200,000-mile, pink inside, whatever. He didn't want it. He said he took it somewhere, but I bet you he kept the key. So if he trying to pick up Volkswagen keys because he doesn't know how to hotwire a car, and people weren't leaving his keys quite as much in 78 as they were in the 60s. In the 60s, you just leave it in an ashtray, oh, the keys in the car, it's in the ashtray, whatever. So 13 keys, Mr. Sullivan. 13 keys. If you had 5 or 6 keys in your pocket, there's a good chance. And I think I wrote Stuttgart or somewhere, and I said, can you tell me? And finally somebody wrote back and said, yes. I said, if somebody had 13 keys, there's a good chance they could open and operate a vehicle. He said, yes. 13 models, 13 profiles. I mean, it blows my mind. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be telling it. 13 keys, that's all they had. So if you had a key, you could open it up. Well, if I have any more, I'll write you later. I can't think of anything else that much right now. But oh my God, I have, and there was chrome. They had chrome bumpers. There was no black. In '74, there's like a black strip that went around. Oh, I know what's going to say. The whole trip to Florida had nothing to do, like Mr. Brownie or whatever his name is, Death Row. He was looking for us. He was looking for Debbie, Vicky, and Jeannie primarily, and then maybe me. I don't know. But I think he thought that was a lost opportunity by letting us go, and he wanted to recreate the thing. Except Debbie sold her home, and they're scattered to the wind. My job was such that I was either at Orange Park Mall selling candy or down at the Port Authority guarding cars. Luckily, odd shifts, odd locations. I went to school at Southside to take my criminal justice, which is way over in Beach Boulevard. Whatever I was doing, through the grace of God, I would have been hard to track down. My name is spelled in such a way, Conely, and most people look Conley, Conley, or they might spell Connol. I worked at IRS 37 years, and I swear internally, they had my name Conley until like the last 10 years of the 37. That was fine. Crazy person. Leave it that way, Gene. I don't care. You know, Branch Sheaf, that's fine. That's my name. Yep. Okay. I think we're going to have to leave it go here. And thank you and have a great day.